Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining us here today. My name is Josh Zimmerman. I'm the Learning and Development Manager here at GitLab, and I'm honored to be joined here with Eric Johnson, EVP of Engineering, as well as a number of IC engineering leaders across the organization. And today we wanted to talk about engineering IC leadership and really get a better understanding of what that means, talk about technical leverage and how engineering IC leaders can implement that into their day-to-day role at GitLab. So thanks everyone for joining me here today. Appreciate your time. Awesome. And I would love it if somebody could define what is engineering IC leadership at GitLab? What does that mean?
Well, I would start to just level set. So like in the most boring sense, we've got a bunch of titles out there. So you can be an intermediate engineer, you can be a senior engineer, and then you have sort of a fork in the road career-wise. So where do you want to go next? Some people choose management. I've obviously done that. There's people like Jerry who actually kind of go back and forth in their career, doing some managerial roles, doing some senior IC roles. And then there's some people that are pretty confident they want to go down that kind of, some companies will call it like the architect route. We don't really use those words in terms of titles. And that's where you start to see staff roles distinguished and fellow roles in engineering. So we kind of view those conceptually as two separate but parallel career tracks. And what I think smart companies like us do is we keep them equal in terms of compensation and prestige. So there should be no incentive to say, I want a bigger paycheck, I want to be better respected in the organization, I've got to be a manager and I've got to manage people to do that. Particularly when you're working on a product like ours, if you can write the best line of code, or if you can make the best architectural decision, you can have just as much leverage in that decision as you would managing people. And we want to incentivize people to, if that's what you're really passionate about, if that's what you want to do, we have the positions to do that in. But what's interesting, I think should become a topic for this group is it's I think more difficult than it sounds, right? You say, okay, well, maybe one of the reasons you go down there is, well, I don't want to deal with messy people problems. Management really isn't for me. So I'll go down this kind of other path. But then you find that, well, it's not writing code all day long. It's something different than that. And also you find yourself in a position where maybe you've got to convince 100 or 500 engineers that some new architectural pattern is the one to follow, but you don't manage them. And so you cannot tell them what to do. Not that managers should be telling people what to do, but you end up having to use a lot of soft skills and communication skills and things that are traditionally thought of as like managerial techniques. And so it's hard to sort of wield that influence and be effective as a senior individual contributor. So I'm interested to get the opinions of everybody we've got on the call. I see Andrew and Jerry and Philippe and others to share how they make these things happen.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that make up engineering leadership at GitLab, but one of the themes that I notice a lot is communication. And so speaking to a lot of people throughout the organization, or throughout your part of the organization at least, whether they be individual contributors or managers or people from different teams, and then picking up themes and hearing the same problem over and over and over, and then integrating that into kind of a narrative, and then passing that narrative back to the teams and kind of building up consensus about the way forward. And often what you'll hear from individuals is kind of like they're part of a sort of bigger problem. And it's about listening to that and sort of integrating all of those different parts together, and then coming up with a narrative, and then coming up with a really good story about how, like, if everyone pulls in the same direction, you can make it better for everyone. So a lot of it's listening and communicating, and then building up that story and then sending it back.
I love, Andrew, that you highlighted getting people on the same page as the problem, because what I said was more kind of about the solution, but you're absolutely right. If people don't agree what the problem is, you're never going to get to the solution. So that's a great thing to highlight as a first step.
Thanks.
So like from my perspective, it's kind of like rephrasing what Andrew said, but also from slightly different perspectives. Like it's also about the fact that engineering leadership is aware of a much bigger scope of how the things function. And like a lot of people that I, for example, work with, they are more focused on the particular item. And with my help, we can discuss like the impact of the work, guide them, like ask them questions, guide them like through that complexity, how to approach, who to approach to much better and much more future-proof solution that maybe is still iterative, but has like much better fit into the product in the longer term, that may also be like useful not only for them but also for other teams that may be working on like on something very close or maybe not close, or maybe they are not yet knowing that they would be interested for someone else.
No, those are great points. Philip, I saw you had something in there too.
Yeah, that's funny because I think it's going to complete what has been said already, and we might have a different definition of what an engineer IC leader might be at GitLab. So for myself, I think it's more about anticipating future challenges and preparing for the unknown, meaning I always have this eye on the 6 months line, maybe 1 year line, maybe 2 year line, making sure that everything that we're doing today will still be relevant in this future and we're still following the right direction. So it's kind of keeping an eye on the big picture and making sure that we won't be in a position in the future where we are going to miss something, or we took the wrong path and we will need to change that right away. So it's it's mostly that, anticipating and keeping track of what has been done already. That I would say, just to complete that it's for me also being a link between all the sub departments and the departments. Making sure that again, with this idea of keeping an eye on the horizon, that everything that we're doing still makes sense in the big picture, that we're not going to overlap with something that another department or sub department is doing. Making sure that what we're going to do is going to deserve some purposes in these departments as well, so that we don't just do something for ourselves. Does it make sense?
So I will start by saying all of the above, because I think senior IC leaders do all of the things that we've been talking about. For me, primarily, and this may have to do with what Eric mentioned, that I sort of go back and forth every 2 to 4 years. It's sort of the interlinking between managers and technical teams. So, managers are focused on getting people to do certain things and making sure that they're happy doing those things. And so sometimes the decisions they have to make have a lot of moving parts that are technical in nature, and they don't need to know all the details. So that's, I think, one aspect, or at least that's probably one of the aspects that I do almost every day. And then the other important one, and again, this is based on what I'm doing right now, there is the problems we're trying to solve now are getting bigger in scope. So it's no longer a single team or a single team member solving that now. That requires, not just people from different teams, but also from different departments, plus the corresponding management chains. And so a lot of the work I am involved in is aligning all these disparate portions of the organization to sort of go into a single target without sort of raising escalations all over the place, right? And so there are a lot of conversations involved in just trying to understand what everybody's trying to get done, and sort of making sure that those wagons are aligned and pointed in the right direction. I've used this terminology. I don't know how popular it is, but I know politics sounds not so good. But I do think politics is a necessary aspect of it. And that really is just about kind of negotiating your way through, hey, this is really important on that side of the organization, and I know you're not super aware of it, but help me here. And then later on, somebody's like, hey, I'm having this problem and I really need your part of the organization to help me out. So you also act as that glue that just the machine is engineered in a certain way, but sometimes you need to make the machine do things that is not that the sort of the the normal channels is not well aligned to do. So I think a lot of us spend time just sort of making sure those things, just the puzzle fits in the right way.
The way I think of politics is like, nobody likes politics. Politics are bad. If you kind of define it as making things happen through sort of nefarious means, like being non-transparent or lying or back channeling or something like that, that's bad. But I think what you're talking about is like, I've heard it said like being politic, like with a K, which just means being aware of your surroundings and making those connections. And I think then what you say is really apt.
Yeah, I think so. The aspect about it, when I think about it, is, for instance, if I think about Eric now has a very large body of people that report into him. So not everything that goes on he can be aware of. Even if we go a level below that, like Christopher or Steve, same thing. Their orgs are doing so much that it's impossible for them. And so I think when I think about politics is I take certain things to Christopher that I think are important, or I highlight certain things to Steve, and then they talk to each other, but I'm closer to sort of where the work is happening. And so those things can get highlighted. Whereas if either of them had to meet with everybody in their orgs, there wouldn't be enough time. So optimizers.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
signal boosting the good things that are going on, or the important things. So using your instincts is really valuable. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, and it's about the politic that we do that's important, I think, is about aligning people. And so sometimes there'll be an initiative that needs multiple teams, and they're all sort of seeing it from a slightly different angle. And then they sort of look at what the other people want to do, and they're like, no, that's different. We want to do something different. And it's about communicating and sort of aligning everyone a little bit, and then people work much better together when they all realize they're pulling in the same direction. And so it's that alignment that I think is really the important part of politics in what I do, or politic, if you want to call it that.
So there's one particular story. I mean, we're kind of going to like the second bullet in the agenda at this point, but like there's a story that Sid shares semi-frequently, and I was wondering if we could get Camille to talk about it, because it was before my time. But the way I understand it is, our strategy today is GitLab is a single application for the DevSecOps lifecycle. But back in the day, it was just source control, and there was a separate GitLab CI. And the way he says it was Camille that really advocated, hey, this should be in the same application. And the initial reaction was no. And then but Camille brought it up again and again and again, and finally got a yes. And now that was the first step down what is a major piece of our strategy. So Camille, I was wondering, when is that the case? And could you share kind of your version of those events, and how you had that sort of like that impetus or that drive that this was such a good idea, this had to happen, I'm going to be relentless?
I'm kind of like thinking about it. Probably I'm an engineer. I'm looking for the efficiencies, and it seemed like the most efficient thing for me to do, like to persuade. So I think like that also about the engineering leadership is like to try to find these efficiencies that gonna make everyone's life easier. Something that may be not so obvious, maybe not so that you would do like on the first try, that maybe seem dumb, but still like reason about that and try to execute that, try to show like the benefits. In this particular case, my thinking was like, I mean, CI. There is just a bunch of the functions, like show like information about the builds, but there is so much other stuff that it's basically the same. Authentication, commit information, like some data, what you show, what change. But like all of that, it's additional effort that you need to basically implement into different places. So this particular idea came out of the efficiency, really. Like I thought that it can be more efficient to really have these two items together. Efficient for me actually to work, because I was actually doing most of the stuff. So I was considerate about my efficiency, and it turned out also be pretty efficient for GitLab, because we figure out that we don't really have to reinvent the wheel so many times if we can make these shared components be truly shared and focus on providing value on top of that.
Great.
I feel like that really fits into the next question around like being a manager one and some of the key attributes and skills. And it sounds like efficiency is a big one. Any other big skills or attributes to share regarding being a manager one for IC leaders?
So I think all the selves of being able to self-prioritize, self-manage, et cetera, but the one I find that I use the most is self-awareness. I know there are areas that I'm not super familiar with, but I make it important for me to know who I need to talk to about that. And so it's kind of understanding the topology of the organization and where the skills are for me to ask the right questions to be able to put a whole picture together. I had this conversation with Gregors a few months ago of whether, someone who's a senior IC leader should be kind of like the Robocop of like, kind of like the Neo of the Matrix, right? I can just do anything. And my prior experience in sort of working for senior IC leaders is that they knew enough to make the right decisions, but they weren't the people that could sort of dismantle the entire thing and know where every nut went. Some people are actually very much capable of that, and it's wonderful. For me, it's more about, for a certain area, knowing that I'm not a super skill in that area, just knowing and understanding who I need to talk to gather the data is probably the most important thing.
It's a big self-awareness piece. Andrew.
Yeah, I think it sort of ties into Jerry's answer, but I think one of the attributes that really helps a lot is being inquisitive. And that's actually why I love getting on incident calls, is because there's always 1,000 things that I don't know anything about, and it really helps me to learn some more of the application. And I don't think you have to like know everything, but when something happens, just going down that rabbit hole for a little while and then coming back out kind of gives you this like wide idea of what's happening throughout the application. And you can only really get that by being inquisitive and kind of deep diving every now and again and then coming back up for air. So I think really having that inquisitiveness helps a lot.
Yeah, it sounds like also like self-learning as well, being proactive and showing initiative to learn new things on your own.
Totally.
So I'm curious, why would someone choose to go down this path as opposed to just general engineering management? I was looking at the engineering IC page and I was asking myself that question. What are the benefits of having a career in IC leadership?
So I think I can speak to that and speak to your previous point about self-learning. It's mostly about growing the others, I would say. But if you want to do that, you can just rely on your previous experiences and skill. And that means for a senior IC, always keeping an eye on everything that would be new, that would be helpful in the way that we are developing software. So everything that will touch technologies, methods, processes, and all that kind of things. So it's not only about shipping new software, shipping new code, it's also how we can improve the overall sub-department where we are and making sure that we're still doing the right thing. We're spending the time where it should be spent, and we're still doing the things by the state of the art, but also trying new things. So that's again pointing to my my first intervention in this meeting. By keeping an eye on the horizon, what could we do in 6 months if we do this differently, for example. So that's not something that you can do by yourself. You need the others to do that, and you need to be able to work with them. Make sure that you will grow the others that are working with you as well.
For me, it's just a variety of problems you get to deal with. And, today is this and tomorrow is that. And you're sort of floating around for me, it's the entire engineering department, even though I'm in infrastructure. And so that to me personally is kind of exciting because it forces me to go and look at things that I wouldn't normally look at within infrastructure. And then the mixture with the management scope, like I'm no longer making management decisions, but I know I'm helping managers make some decisions. And so that kind of also pushes me into understanding how managers are operating and the kinds of decisions that they're making, which for me personally is helpful because when my own pendulum swings back into management, then I've sort of gathered that experience. And I try to, I remember when I first started at GitLab, one of the first things I did was to sit really close to Andrew. And I was wearing the management hat, and he was sort of he was the technical leader within infrastructure. And so that becomes a very powerful partnership because I'm focused on solving management problems, but then I have someone who can speak to the technical challenges. So that at least, especially initially, helped me tremendously to sort of make certain decision of we're going to prioritize this or we're going to do that. So, and then the mentoring aspects of it. I'm a huge believer in pay it forward. I've been blessed with a number of people in my career that have helped me progress. And so now I try to do that with other folks. So I do spend a significant, or I do invest a significant amount of time in just having coffee chats or mentoring chats or whatever we want to call it with other folks. Camille.
So actually, like what I find like the most valuable is something that may be actually counterproductive. It's context switching. I'm like through the week, I am exposed to so many different discussions and like problems that are facing that it's actually amazing learning opportunity for me, but also it's amazing leverage opportunity for me because I can work with so much variety of the people, improve my skills, but also kind of give them hints in which direction they should go, what they should be looking at, and figure out a way also to make others successful by giving them my knowledge that I learned by being with GitLab a long time and actually doing a lot of this context switching over and over. At some point, I was thinking that this context switching is like the worst thing ever, but to be honest, I think it's something inevitable. And it's actually something that it's super beneficial because this exposure to different problems gives you much bigger perspective, and you can teach others to also learn this bigger perspective and be actually like a set of group of the people that can take on a bigger and bigger tasks over time because of that, because we had opportunity to work together on something that was way beyond like the scope of like the single group, or maybe it involved many different teams or many different groups in the organization. So I think for me, like the biggest benefit is context switching and like the leverage that you can get out of that really, especially in teaching others on being effective in that. Because usually context switching is pretty severe in being productive, unless you learn how to deal with that.
Yeah, I think it's sort of everyone else has touched on this, and this for me is one of the benefits is in my own way, I'm very much a people person, and I love building up relationships with different people who have different jobs. And in this role, that's one of the things that I love is you know, I talk to TAMs, I talk to customers, I talk to people in all sorts of different parts of the organization. And I really enjoy that, and I like building up those relationships. And one day when we get to have a summit again, it'll be really great to see everyone face to face and kind of have met a lot of these people in different roles. And I enjoy that. That's definitely one of the benefits of being a senior IC to me.
Great. Yeah, those are a lot of great points, and I think there's a lot we can extract there and include on the page. You know, I'm curious too. You know, one thing I saw was that, you know, being technically credible is obviously a key attribute of engineering IC leadership. But, you know, another thread that was brought up was characteristics around technical leverage and what that really means for IC leaders. So I'm curious, what are the differences between those two, technical leverage and technical competence and credibility?
Yeah, and thanks for asking this, Josh, because you're sort of looking at our handbook with fresh eyes. And so if we haven't made this clear, we could probably update this. And the technical leverage one is kind of a new one. So we're still kind of filling this one out. So I think there's sort of two things in there. Technical credibility to me is, like if we're managers, we say, work on small features, bugs, but stay out of the critical path. That's for the ICs who do it all day, every day. That's sort of our bar for technical credibility for managers. And we have a functional org. So we want managers, that manage backend engineers or UX managers to be former ICs in that area. I think the technical credibility bar is higher for senior ICs where they're spending more time on this stuff, and maybe they were the best engineer in their team before they were promoted into this position. But it's certainly higher than the management bar. So I'm interested in your people's thoughts about that. And then technical leverage, that's kind of our attempt to come up with an individual contributor analog to the concept of managerial leverage in Andy Grove's book, High Output Management. And so it's kind of what I described earlier, where we need people making technical decisions that can, let's say, improve the development environment for tens of engineers, or make a architectural decision in the product that increases performance or adds value to hundreds or thousands of customers and users. That's sort of along the lines of what we're thinking for technical leverage. But I'm curious to hear everybody's thoughts on both those concepts.
I'm actually probably like one thing that I learned a lot from Sid working in this company, like don't be afraid of doing iteration and making mistakes. Like the smaller iteration you make, even if you make a mistake, it's much easier like to correct that because you make very small iteration. And I think that this is out of the technical leverage, this is something that I also try to like convey in everything that I do and with everyone that I work with. Like, I mean, we are not always right. We sometimes make a crappy stuff, and I did plenty of that stuff as well. But I think like the most important aspect is to realize that we did something wrong and correct that as quickly as possible to stay on this track of being iterative and like actually making things quickly. Don't be afraid of breaking stuff. Just be prepared that it breaks, like what worst thing can happen and how you can react to that and how you can actually solve that problem. It's not the problem that it happened. The question is like how you respond to that and how it affects your future decision.
Yeah, that's interesting, Camille. I hadn't thought of that, but you're right. So for people that are watching this video, iteration is one of our core values. To me, it's certainly the most counterintuitive one, the hardest one for people to learn. And it sounds like what you're saying there is that our IC leaders have a role in helping other engineers understand about how to make things small. So like, I'd say like iteration for us is kind of a meta strategy. It's like, even when we don't know what to do, we'll just do a series of small things and we'll kind of navigate our way to the solution over time. Or it's one way to say it is like, we never make big mistakes because we never do big things. We make small mistakes all the time, but you can recover from small mistakes. And as long as you have kind of a North Star, like an idea of where you need to go, you can iterate your way there. So that's really interesting and maybe we should highlight that more, that we really expect our senior technical leaders to be helping others who join the organization learn what iteration means. Because I think people that have been here a while, like Sid runs iteration office hours, or all of you, I've seen you do it. Someone thinks they've got something that's as small as it can possibly be. And then one of you looks at it and sure enough, you can strip 80% out of it. And it's hard for people to do that. It's a different way than other companies work, where you try to kind of like hit the target the first time. But it takes forever, and usually you miss anyway. And we don't do that, but very few people join with what I would say is GitLab level instincts of iteration, and has to be sort of learned here over time.
Yes, so I think like the most important aspect of that is like understanding the implications of the things that you do, because like the wrong change would be the one that you are making that you don't know what you are making and you don't understand the risk associated with that. So kind of like rephrasing Andrew's comment, like as long as you are making a change, you understand the implications of doing that change and you understand like the recovery scenario. I mean, two-way door decision, really, this kind of thing. it's actually the right iteration. If you are hesitant and you don't understand how your change can break stuff, then this is something for you to reconsider and actually seek for the guidance to understand before that. Because like, then if you make a decision, you really know exactly how to revert that. And you also have some kind of process for how to approach the next like step in this process. So Andrew, maybe you have anything to add on that? Because like you work on the infrastructure side and you are being exposed to a lot of these risks.
Yeah, that's, you know, a lot of the time people will come to you with the iterative process, and I think especially in infrastructure, like you say, there's a lot of risk that can break things in bad ways. It's taking the way that people might be iterating and maybe explaining to them a different way of doing the same thing, but doing it in a more not risk averse, because you're not looking to totally mitigate risk, but do it in a way
Safer.
exactly like pardon?
Safer,
sorry,
in a
Jerry.
safer way.
Safer, exactly. Like we don't want to be totally risk averse, but we want to do it in a safer way and in a reversible way. So we can make small incremental changes that we can measure. And then if we realize that one of those steps has gone wrong, we can roll it back and like reconsider at that point. And I think a lot of the experience that we bring is kind of bringing people around to iterating in a safer way. Jerry, do you want to make your point? The one above, I think I jumped in.
Oh, no, no worries. So I think also one of the important aspects that, or roles that we play is when we're looking at a given problem from various points of view, then understanding those points, even though some of those angles is not where we usually live in the organization, it's very useful. And so we're trying to strike a balance that overall benefits everybody. And I point the post-restore example because this is something that recently came up. Product had a date in mind. It didn't jive super well with infrastructure's sort of scheduling. But in the end, we decided, no, we're going to do this because if we hit the target that product is asking for and that development wants, then it benefits everybody. And the benefit, you know, product gets what they want. And then development doesn't have to support an older version of Postgres. And the benefit for infrastructure is if they're working on addressing, you know, if they're not spending cycles supporting an older version of Postgres, then that means they're supporting new features or supporting problems that are hurting GitLab.com. So being able to bring those three views into play, then it's how essentially you go back to management and say, this is a win-win-win for everybody, and we should rearrange things to make it happen. I think most of the time, managers have more of a more vertical view of things, even though they do talk to each other. But for the senior ICs, we're always sort of walking around the entire field. So it's kind of easier sometimes for us to sort of see these angles and then go back to the different management layers and say, we should sort of change direction to get these things done. So that the thing that, and it sort of goes into the point Andrew was making, was risk mitigation and striking that balance between move forward, but you know, at this rate, or rearrange things so that we can get a little bit more efficient.
Yeah, and I wrote this down. You've sort of touched on it already, but I'll state it again. I think a lot of the stuff that we deal with is horizontal, where especially at GitLab, it is quite a vertical organization, right? The way that product and stage groups and UX and the development teams are all focused is quite horizontal. And then you'll have problems like how to get Puma to reboot. And it's a very, very important problem, but it's very much a horizontal problem that's going to affect everyone. And sometimes those things don't quite have a natural home at GitLab. And so often it's up to senior ICs, like in that case, Camille, to kind of pick that up and drive those changes. And those are the horizontal issues that we try to integrate.
Philippe, I think you got the last point there.
Yeah, I was not sure. I got a bit lost in the agenda, sorry. I would like to see that a lot more at GitLab, and that's a pity to me that we're confusing so often iteration and simplicity. I'm a strong advocate of keeping things simple, and I think we too often sit behind the iteration flag. I mean, sometimes the destination is so obvious for everyone that we think that the iteration is going to do it the right way. But no one is actually questioning the destination, how we could get there with a different path. So that's the danger of iteration to me. That's a great tool if you know how to use it, but if you use it the wrong way, you can spend iterations over iterations doing the wrong thing. Whereas you can do something that would be much more simpler, would solve the problem like right away, just thinking out of the box. And that's where the IC leadership is extremely important in an organization like GitLab. Just to remind people that there are other ways to solve problems. There are other ways to think. There are ways to think out of the box. I can come with some examples, some real example, and that's probably going to be beyond the scope of this meeting. But when we joined the company with my team, that was after the Gymnasium acquisition, the obvious way to integrate Gymnasium, which was a SaaS to detect software dependencies and especially security issues in these dependencies. The obvious way was to port everything that we had to a new service that would be integrated into GitLab. I mean, if you ask anyone in the product organization, they will tell you that, okay, we need a new service, we need to run that, we need a new UI to integrate all of this, and maybe by the next 6 months from now, we will have something running and we will be able to ship something to the customers. And we did exactly the opposite. The destination for us was not to have something integrated as a service in 6 months. The goal for us was, okay, how can we make the product or the existing Gymnasium product fit into the GitLab within the next iteration? What is the minimal set of features that we can take and export so that we can have something in the next iteration? And Sid was extremely, I would say, cautious with our thinking back in the time when we said we're going to have something running in a month. And just by thinking out of the box, not porting that to a service, but leveraging the pipelines and Docker images and all kind of things, we managed to have something up and running one iteration later. And the iteration after that, there was more features, there was more services that we were able to fulfill. So that was an example of, okay, just don't blindly all the time follow the direction that someone would give you. That's where the IC leadership is supposed to just step back a bit and make sure that we're taking the right decisions, we're heading in the right way, and we are using the right tools. And I see that really, really often. We think that if we want to solve that problem, there's only this direction. And sometimes, yeah, another example would be, for example, we need, I'm no part of the security sub-department. I switched from the development department recently. And in the security sub-department, we need to update, for example, the severities of the vulnerabilities that are found by the secure products. The obvious way to do that is to create a new API endpoint and something new in the UI so that you can change the severity and you can update that. And that's a complete workflow that could take 3 iterations now at GitLab. So that's very long, and sometimes we just don't have time to wait for this kind of iterative work. And we just came up with something that was extremely simple. We were dealing with the reports directly in the pipeline, and just by putting all the results of these reports into JQ and tweaking the output of the report and generating another report that would be the final report, we managed to do exactly what we wanted. And it took us like 1 or 2 days just to implement that. And all the engineers in Secure were kind of blown away by this simplicity. It's a different way to do things, and we should strive to do things in this simple way all the time, instead of trying to solve all the problems at once and trying to make everyone happy. This is never going to be the case. There's no way we can come up with something that will make all our customers happy, at least in the first or the two first iterations.
Yeah, so Philippe, when you first started talking, I was like, oh, we're going to get far afield of the topic, but you brought it back, and I think there's something really interesting there. So like, if I could use an analogy and kind of restate what you said, at my last company, we did a lot of machine learning projects, and some of them those were generative algorithms, or like Darwinian algorithms. So they generate versions of themselves. And you can think of like a 2D problem space. And then there's a boundary in there, which is like the theoretical limit of efficiency for any one of these algorithms. And when you're iterating, you can find yourself in what's called like a local minimum, and you can't get any more efficient. That doesn't matter how many generations you keep generating and things you try, you're sort of stuck in this little valley. And one of the ways my team there got around these problems is you add a stochastic component to that generation process that sort of randomly jumps to a new part of the problem space. And if you're at a different part of that limit, suddenly you find, oh, I can optimize a lot more, and you can get down to a more efficient state. And so if I were to translate that to kind of like what you said and this sort of organizational problem solving, sometimes when we iterate, we get stuck in that sort of local minimum, and maybe we're missing an opportunity to do something dramatically more simple. And so you have to do something larger than our normal iteration to kind of get there. And that's where we rely on our senior IC leaders. But it's not a stochastic random process, right? We're relying on your instincts and your vision to say, we've got to get out of this local minimum. We've got to go way over here, but we're going to do it in one iteration. And then we're going to have all this ground or problem space in front of us where we can keep iterating. So like you said, standing back, kind of understanding the whole problem space and recommending when like, look, we're stuck, we've got to do something that we feel a little bit uncomfortable with and go way over here. But then, when it's the right decision, we take that risk, we find ourselves in a sort of with a lot more area to kind of go forward and improve.
Absolutely.
Those are great points, and I want to be sensitive to time here. So just really quick, on the 4 archetypes, the tech lead, architect, solver, and right hand that are outlined on the page, how do those influence the work of IC leadership? And maybe influence is not the right word there. Maybe it's more defined.
Yeah, that's my comment. I'm not sure they influence the work. They kind of define the work of IC leadership. We are always switching between the 4, depending on the task that we're working on. And that's also the beauty of IC leadership. You have different hats, and that's a constant context switch. Jerry, you want to speak to that?
Oh, I think we're all saying the same, right? For me,
Yeah.
it's pick the right hat, or I find it to be a case that is more of picking the right percentage of each that you apply to different situations or different people or different problem. So I think that's, having the understanding that those archetypes are essentially the 4 channels or the 4 tools that you have on the things you do, and when to use each is probably the thing that helps us make progress.
To me, it's sort of an indicator that there's actually a tremendous amount of latitude for people on that senior IC track about how they're effective. Probably more so, honestly, in management. I mean, there's so much stuff we do in management that's sort of standardized. You get to make a lot of decisions, but it's oftentimes quite framed how you do that. But at the end of the day, the people that are making the right decisions, that are getting results in the IC track, it can happen a lot of different ways. And the way Jerry does things and makes decisions is different from how Stan does it, which is different again from DZ. And it's all okay as long as the results are there. So it's in a strange way, sort of one of those roles where the most sort of like individual style can come into play. But it also means maybe there's not quite as many kind of role models. So you have to sort of figure out your own style as you go down this this path.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking that like it's even important to understand like the strength of each leadership I see. I just have much more preference on some of these archetypes than others. For example, I know that Gary is more like the type of person that tries to join many people, where I'm more like into trying to solve like these engineering challenges that are being thrown like from different places. So I think it's important to like understand around you how you can leverage other people, which includes management, other IC leaderships, other ICs, and basically everyone, to focus on like something that it's like the most effective. I mean, I'm going back to this effectiveness, but focus on like on your most effective thing that gives like the biggest benefit, and leverage others to actually to make other things that are required to make these things to happen.
Yeah, I really like that point, Camille. Like, I think when I think of the senior ICs, they're all so different. And if I need to engage with people, I kind of figure out what the problem is, and then I almost know who the right person to go to is, because everyone has a unique set of the way they work and a unique set of skills. And so it's almost pretty obvious who the person to speak to is, because they're all unique.
This reminds me of the movie Taken.
I have a very specific set of skills that line.
Right. I think, and we're out of time, but that final point I'm making, it's also true that there may be a perception that we're kind of working alone with everybody, but the truth is that there is a lot of collaboration between the senior ICs. So I tend to think of us more of as a group that is just highly distributed, than sort of individual units just sort of doing the Delta Force type thing. And I don't think we talk enough about how the group is actually functioning as a group.
Yeah, no, these are great points. And I think there's a lot of value in having conversations like this and bringing you all together to discuss these, topics. So I think we should try to schedule another one in the future on another engineering topic that's, near and dear to your all's heart. But I got a ton of value out of this, and I know everybody else watching will as well. So if there's anything else you'd like to share, feel free to, but we are at time. Thanks so much for taking part and for your time. It's greatly appreciated.
Thanks,
Thank
Josh,
you.
and thanks everyone.
Bye.
Take care.